20 years. That's how long I gave them. My loyalty, my brilliance, my life. And in the end, I stood in court, pleading guilty to a crime I didn't commit, just to keep myself breathing. The one thing I love the most, the career I built with my own hands, was the very thing that ripped everything away from me. Before we start, like this video, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the smell of coffee or the skyline glittering outside the 42nd floor. It was the noise. Westlake Securities was never quiet. Phones rang, assistants barked into headsets, traders cursed under their breath. But this wasn't noise. This was commotion. Whispered voices. Papers shuffled too quickly. The kind of restless energy you only feel when the sharks smell blood. I stepped out of the elevator, and heads turned. Not in the usual way. Not the respectful nods I'd earned after 2 decades of building empires for this firm. No, this was different. Eyes darting. Whispers clipped mid-sentence, like everyone had seen a fire and were waiting to see who got burned. Who is it this time? I heard one junior trader mutter to another as I passed. Who could be that careless, bringing the SEC here? My gut tightened. The SEC. That explained the 2 men in dark suits near reception, their expressions flat, their briefcases chained to their wrists like executioner's axes. Everyone knew what their presence meant. An investigation. Someone's career about to be gutted and dragged across the financial pages for the world to watch. But whose? I walked through the murmurs, the pitying stares. It wasn't me. Couldn't be me. I had nothing to hide. My deals were clean, my trades precise. I built my reputation on not making mistakes. Still, as I reached the glass doors of the executive boardroom, my pulse was already racing. Martin Gray, the managing partner, stood waiting. His face was carefully composed, but I'd known Martin for years. His jaw was too tight, his eyes too calm. "Richard," he said, motioning me inside. "We need to talk." The boardroom was suffocating. The blinds were drawn, the long mahogany table littered with files, but only one was open. A thick folder, neatly prepared, waiting for me at the head of the table. Martin didn't sit. He stood behind the chair, hand resting on the folder as though it were a weapon. "The SEC is here," he said flatly. "They have questions about trades made under your account." My account. He slid the folder toward me. I pulled it open, hands already cold. Inside were transaction sheets. Huge trades, hundreds of millions, executed days before mergers I had worked on personally. The profits obscene. The kind of trades that scream insider information. And every one of them bore my name. My codes. My approvals. For a second, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just suspicion. This was a death sentence. I looked up at Martin, searching his face for some sign that this was a mistake, that he'd already started clearing it up. But all I saw was distance. Cold, practice distance. The kind you use when you've already decided a man is guilty. Outside, I could hear the shuffle of footsteps, the whisper of employees too afraid to speak my name. Inside, silence pressed down like a stone slab. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just walked into a meeting. I'd walked into my execution. The door clicked open behind me. 2 men stepped in, flanking each other with the stiff precision of predators who never needed to raise their voices to command fear. Dark suits, identical black briefcases, badges flashed like blades. SEC Enforcement Division. "Mr. Hale," the taller one said. His voice was smooth, almost courteous. But the way his eyes flicked over me was clinical, dissecting. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." I should have answered. Should have laughed, played it off, bought myself time. But all I managed was a single word. "Questions." He set his briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and pulled out a thin stack of documents. Trade confirmations. Wire transfers. Internal emails. Every page pointed to me. "You executed these trades," he said, sliding them across with deliberate care. "Correct." My eyes scanned the numbers. Hundreds of millions leveraged days before merger announcements. Profits clean, surgical. Too clean. I knew the pattern instantly. The kind of insider trading case you'd show in a classroom. Only it wasn't mine. "I didn't place these trades," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Someone's using my credentials." "This isn't." The shorter agent cut me off. "Mr. Hale, we have timestamps. Logins from your workstation. Recorded approvals. Even correspondence suggesting you knew these deals were coming." He tapped one email, highlighted in yellow. A message supposedly from me. Greenlight this position. News breaks in 2 days. It wasn't my wording. It wasn't even my cadence. But to a jury, it would sing like gospel. I turned to Martin, my boss, my supposed ally. You know I didn't. But Martin's face was stone. Not sympathy. Not even surprise. Just the calculated neutrality of a man already cutting me out of the picture. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. And everyone in that room knew it. By evening, my accounts were frozen. My phone seized. My office locked. I went from one of the firm's most powerful executives to a ghost in less than 6 hours. The next morning, the headline screamed, Westlake's senior executive, Hale, under SEC investigation for insider trading. My name, my career, my reputation, all reduced to a scandal before I'd even had a chance to speak. My lawyers laid it out in brutal clarity. Richard, one of them said, leaning across the steel table in a conference room that smelled faintly of bleach and defeat. You can fight this. But if you lose, and you will, you're looking at 20 years minimum. Maybe more. Insider trading at this scale? They'll make an example out of you. And if I take the deal? I asked, voice hollow. 1 month in prison. You'll lose your licenses, your position, your assets. But you'll walk free. It was a trap. Fight, and I'd be buried alive. Plead, and I'd be branded for life. They thought they'd cornered me. And maybe they had. Because that afternoon, I stood in federal court, raised my hand, and pled guilty to a crime I didn't commit. Cameras flashed like gunfire as I admitted guilt. My voice echoed back at me, alien, hollow. 1 month. 30 days in a concrete cell, eating food that tasted like ash, surrounded by men who'd broken the law and at least had the honesty to admit it. But prison wasn't the punishment. The punishment was stepping out on the other side to nothing. No job, no wealth, no allies. My penthouse gone, my accounts drained, my name synonymous with fraud. And the men who had set me up? They were richer, higher, untouchable. I walked through those days like a man underwater, but the rage never left me. Rage at their smirks in the boardroom. Rage at Martin's cold silence. Rage at myself for signing away my innocence. They thought they'd destroyed me, but all they'd done was light the fuse. Freedom didn't taste like freedom. The morning I stepped out of that cell, the air hit my face sharp and cold, but it didn't cleanse me. It carried whispers, judgments, stares I couldn't escape. The press was there, cameras circling like vultures, their shutters snapping as though they were cutting the last strips of flesh from my bones. Richard Hale, disgraced Westlake executive, convicted felon, insider trader. They shouted it like a liturgy. And I walked through it like a penitent through fire, except I wasn't absolved. I was branded. My penthouse was gone. The luxury cars, the Hamptons house, the private club memberships, all liquidated to cover fines and legal fees. What remained was a single-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a mattress that sagged in the middle. From commanding boardrooms on the 42nd floor, I'd been reduced to listening to the couple next door argue over overdue rent. But the worst part wasn't what I lost. It was how quickly the world moved on without me. The men who set me up, Martin Gray, Stephen Klein, the whole boardroom cabal, were thriving. Deals still flowed through Westlake. Their names filled the headlines I once owned. Martin's grin on the cover of Forbes, Klein boasting about Westlake's new era of integrity on CNBC. Integrity. The word made me want to put my fist through the screen. I tried, at first, to fight back. Called old colleagues, men I'd mentored, clients who once swore they owed me everything. But the phone always rang hollow. Sometimes they answered, voices tight, making excuses about bad timing or reputational risk. Most didn't answer at all. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a liability. Nights were the worst. Alone in that stinking apartment, the city's noise leaking through the thin walls, I'd lie awake replaying it all. The folder sliding across the boardroom table, the agent's eyes dissecting me, Martin's silence. I drank, at first, to numb it. But alcohol dulled the rage, and I couldn't afford that. I needed it sharp. Razor sharp. So instead, I studied. I pored over everything. SEC regulations, case law, financial loopholes, offshore corporate structures. My disgrace had stripped me of the illusion that the system was fair. Now I studied it not to play by its rules, but to learn how to bend them, twist them, choke men with their own paper chains. I started small. Consulting for desperate hedge funds too toxic for big firms to touch. They paid in scraps, but I didn't care. What I wanted wasn't money. It was access. Data. A window back into the bloodstream of Wall Street. And slowly, patterns emerged. Deals linked back to Westlake. Profits hidden through shell companies. Accounts in the Caymans, Luxembourg, Singapore. I saw their fingerprints everywhere. The bastards hadn't just framed me. They were still dirty. Filthy. Feeding from the same trough, only now fatter, bolder, certain they were untouchable. That was when the obsession crystallized into clarity. I wasn't going to clear my name. That would be too small, too clean. I was going to burn theirs. Every one of them. Martin Gray, Stephen Klein. The board that watched me bleed and smirked while I died. They thought I was finished, but I was already digging tunnels beneath their empire, brick by brick. And one day soon, I'd pull them down into the abyss with me. Obscurity has its uses. Once, every room I entered bent toward me. Now, no one looked twice. To most of Wall Street, I was already a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered to interns about the price of greed. Perfect. Ghosts move unseen. It started with the small funds. Hedge shops run by half-broke gamblers desperate to avoid being devoured by the giants. They couldn't hire the prestigious firms, so they hired me, the disgraced, the tainted, the man with nothing left to lose. They thought I was their consultant. In truth, I was their parasite. Through them, I wormed my way back into the system. Trading records, market whispers, insider chatter flowing through back channels. They gave me scraps, but I stitched those scraps together into something bigger, a map of power. And on that map, one name pulsed like a vein of poison. Westlake. Martin Gray, my old boss, hadn't just survived the scandal. He'd thrived on it. Westlake Securities was expanding, swallowing firms whole, laundering their reputation through new compliance protocols. The irony burned. The men who framed me as their sacrificial lamb were parading as paragons of virtue, their pockets fatter than ever. I couldn't strike yet. Rage without patience is just suicide. Instead, I built leverage. I paid assistants for scraps of information, bought drinks for risk analysts who talked too much, seduced secrets out of men who thought their wives would never know. Every favor owed, every whispered confession, I cataloged with precision. And then, the real breakthrough. A file slipped to me by a junior compliance officer too naive to know its worth. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, ties to regulators who were supposed to be watching them. It was a mirror of my downfall. The same tricks they used to bury me, they were still using, only bigger, bolder, sloppier. That was when I knew I had them. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. The first time I stepped back into Westlake's lobby, no one recognized me. I'd trimmed the hair, I had lost weight, worn a suit tailored plain enough to disappear. The receptionist's smile didn't falter as she waved me past. To her, I was just another faceless consultant heading upstairs. But for me, it was resurrection. The marble floors, the endless glass, the scent of money in the air. I'd once ruled this kingdom. Now I walked its halls invisible, a phantom come to take it back piece by piece. In the boardroom, Martin's photo hung on the wall, smiling his politician's grin. I stopped, staring at it until my reflection glared back through the glass frame. "You don't even know you're already dead," I whispered. My trap would be elegant. Not brute force, not a gun in the night. No, on Wall Street, the real execution is public and clean, with lawyers and headlines doing the killing for you. So I began to build it. A deal too sweet for Westlake to resist. A shell so intricate even their lawyers wouldn't see the cracks. Something that would lure them in, make them greedy, make them overextend. And while they feasted on the bait, I'd already be feeding the SEC and the press. Not scraps, not whispers, hard evidence. Enough to make even Martin Gray sweat through his $1,000 suits. They thought they'd buried me, but I wasn't buried. I was planting roots. And when I rose again, I wouldn't be the man they remembered. I would be the knife at their throats. On Wall Street, the deadliest deals never look dangerous. They gleam. They sparkle. They taste like victory until the poison sets in. That was the beauty of the trap I built. It wasn't a scheme. It was an opportunity. The mark was a shell company, Lioncrest Capital Partners. On paper, they were a rising private equity firm out of Singapore, flush with sovereign wealth money and hungry for U.S. acquisitions. In reality, Lioncrest was smoke and mirrors, a web of offshore trusts and frontmen that all led back to me. I crafted them carefully. Quarterly filings perfect down to the comma. A track record of overseas deals, too far-flung to verify, but just plausible enough to impress. By the time Westlake's analysts sniffed around, they were convinced Lioncrest was real. And when Lioncrest whispered about a once-in-a-decade acquisition, Westlake was all ears. The bait, an energy conglomerate in Eastern Europe, undervalued, but positioned to explode. A deal so massive it could put Westlake on the map as the global leader. Martin Gray couldn't resist. Neither could Stephen Klein. They leaned in, hungry, their eyes full of the same arrogance that had once written me off as expendable. They didn't see the cracks, the valuations that didn't add up, the financial statements carefully salted with lies. They saw gold. And so they reached. Behind the scenes, I'd already set the second blade. Through my network of consultants, I'd funneled a stream of documents to the SEC. Not anonymous tips, they ignore those. Hard files, wire transfers, offshore accounts in the Caymans, tied directly to Westlake's senior partners. Enough evidence to prove they weren't just complicit in fraud, they were orchestrating it. And to the press, I'd leaked whispers. A too-good-to-be-true deal. Rumors of insider trading. The kind of smoke that makes journalists sniff the air, circling for fire. By the time Westlake signed the Lioncrest contracts, their necks were already in the noose. The collapse came like thunder. 2 weeks after the deal went public, the European energy conglomerate defaulted on its bonds. Billions vanished overnight. Westlake had leveraged itself to the teeth, certain the windfall would cover the debt. Now they were bleeding cash, scrambling to explain how they'd missed something so catastrophic. Then the second hammer fell. The SEC announced an investigation into Westlake for fraudulent disclosures and insider trading, citing credible evidence of systematic misconduct. Overnight, their stock cratered. Clients fled. Rivals circled like sharks, tearing pieces off what was left. And the press? They feasted. Westlake in crisis. Integrity crumbles under Gray. Martin's face, once smug on magazine covers, now plastered across the news with captions that read like epitaphs. I watched it all from the quiet of my apartment, the same four walls that once smelled of failure. Only now, they smelled like victory. But victory is never clean. Martin Gray knew. I saw it in his eyes the day the headlines broke. His cold, reptilian certainty faltering for the first time. He knew this wasn't chance. Someone had set him up. And sooner or later, he'd realize who. That was fine. Because by then, it would be too late. The collapse was spectacular. By the third week, Westlake stock was a carcass. From towering at $180 a share, it plunged to single digits. Margin calls hammered the firm into insolvency. Clients bolted, regulators circled, and reporters clawed every skeleton out of their closets. But numbers falling on a screen weren't enough for me. Revenge isn't about balance sheets. It's about faces. About watching the light leave a man's eyes when he realizes he's already dead. Stephen Klein was the first to fall. The man loved excess, penthouses, models, the kind of arrogance you could smell from across a room. When the investigation went public, I leaked one final file. Proof he'd siphoned client money into offshore trusts for years. The DOJ pounced. I attended his arraignment, blending into the crowd. He shuffled in wearing shackles, his orange jumpsuit hanging loose on a body that once wore Brioni suits. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted his name, and for once, Stephen Klein had no smirk to give them. He caught my eye as they dragged him past. Just a flicker of recognition, confusion, dread. He knew. He just couldn't prove it. The board members went next. Men who'd sat silent while I was gutted in that boardroom. Too cowardly to speak, too greedy to care. I fed their sins to the wolves. Emails, hidden trades, conflicts of interest. The SEC dismantled them piece by piece, slapping bans, freezing accounts, seizing properties. By the end, they weren't titans of finance. They were pariahs, whispering to lawyers in dimly lit offices, begging for mercy that never came. And then there was Martin Gray, the architect of my ruin. The man who'd slid that folder across the table with hands too calm, eyes too cold. I waited for him, saved him for last. When Westlake finally collapsed into bankruptcy, Martin tried to pivot. Press conferences, polished statements, swearing he'd been blindsided like everyone else. But the evidence I'd given prosecutors was a blade he couldn't dodge, falsified disclosures, kickbacks, bribes to regulators. They raided his townhouse at dawn. Cameras caught him in handcuffs, face pale, jaw trembling. The mighty Martin Gray, who once commanded skyscrapers, now just another criminal dragged into the light. I watched it live, coffee in hand, calm. Later, I went to see him. Not as Richard Hale, disgraced executive. Not as the man they once destroyed, but as the ghost who came back to collect. He was in a holding cell, behind bulletproof glass. Hi. His eyes found me instantly. For a moment, the mask cracked, and I saw it. Fear. You, he hissed. It was you. I leaned forward, let him see the calm in my face, the steadiness in my eyes. You framed me to save yourself, I said quietly. You thought you were burying me, but all you did was teach me the game. He slammed his fists on the table, the sound hollow. You'll go down too. They'll find out. I smiled. They already did. And I walked out. You won't. The guard pulled me away, but I didn't fight it. I'd seen what I needed to see. Martin Gray was finished. When it was over, the city moved on. Westlake dissolved into nothing, its assets scavenged by rivals. The men who once ruled its boardrooms were scattered, bankrupt, imprisoned, disgraced. And me? I walked the streets as no one, a shadow among the crowd. But I carried the knowledge that I had rewritten the game. They thought they'd taught me a lesson. They had. Not about humility, not about redemption, about power. On Wall Street, destruction isn't loud. It's not bullets or bombs. It's whispers, numbers, and the slow tightening of a noose until even giants choke. And now, I was the one holding the rope. If you enjoyed this video, like this video, comment your thoughts if you think Hale got the justice he deserves, or do you think he became more like his accusers? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.